Phew. Okay, we did it. Good evening, everyone. Sorry we're a little bit late. I was having technical difficulties my end. As per usual, we're going to take a couple of minutes to let everyone arrive and for us to share to any pages we may run and manage. Can everyone see us and hear us? Eop, midok. Awesome. Yes, loud and clear. Great to hear it. Wonderful. Awesome. So, without further ado, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, good night, wherever you are in the world. My name is Harry Thompson, and this is the Naughty Autie in conversation, this time with Autie Angel. Hi, Angel. Autie Angel is an autistic self-advocate, writer, musician, and artist devoted to sharing her experience with neurodivergent life, CPTSD, as a survivor of domestic violence and child abuse and chronic illness through writing, music, and art. She has 9 albums worth of music, and her writing has been published in various publications. She is the creator of The Adoring Crow, home to her artistic and herbalist projects. Sergeant Sparrow, a music, art, and literary blog. Lost Ghost, a poetry and writing blog, and creator of the Instagram @Autie Angel. Okay, so the trigger warnings for tonight are child abuse and domestic, physical and emotional and narcissistic abuse. Awesome. Angel, was there anything about you that I didn't mention? In terms of your description, professional description or whatever?
No, I think that is accurate. I guess I would say that I'm not a professional when it comes to talking about trauma. I only speak from personal experience, so that's important to note. I don't have any kind of psychology degree or anything. I've just lived through it myself. Okay,
thank you very much. So I have some questions here for Angel. And for those of you watching, feel free to chime in at any point and ask your own questions. And at the end of the Q&A session, I will be able to pick up any questions you may have for Angel with regards to tonight's topic. So, as usual, I will ask the question, how and when, Angel, did you discover that you're autistic?
Okay. I am not used to speaking, so you guys might have to bear with me.
That's fine.
I think it's been 4 years now, and I was in a group at the time. I guess I was pretty involved with the New Age spiritual community, and I was in a group, and the group was dedicated to trauma survivors and sort of just like supporting each other. And one of the members, who wound up becoming a friend, posted a video about her diagnosis of autism, and she wanted to share her experience because in, I think, her perspective, a lot of people in the group seemed like they might be autistic. And at the time, I didn't know anything about autism. I guess I may have even had some ableist perspectives because I didn't know anything about it. And I had been diagnosed with PTSD when I was 21. So I chalked up every experience I had to, I'm traumatized. So that's why this is happening. So I was 35 at the time. And when she shared her video and started going through the diagnostic criteria and the differences in female presenting autistics, I realized, like, actually my literal comment on her really long video was, oh my God, that sounds like me, period. Like, that was it. And I think I was stunned. So she messaged me privately and was like, you know, if you want to talk about any of this, let me know. And she sent me some links. She told me about the book Asper Girls, and I read that, and it was kind of like reading my life story in a lot of ways. Then I found the Samantha Kraft female women's checklist for autism, and I printed it out, and there's 100 markers on the list for, you know, presenting symptomology. Is that the right word? And I had 99 out of 100 of that list. And the only thing that I felt like I didn't really relate to was OCD. And I printed that out. I took it to my doctor. I had to go back 3 times, bringing more evidence, because he was like, no, you know, that's not you. And then the 3rd time I went back, I just bawled my eyes out. And I was like, I swear to God, I am autistic and I need you to believe me. And I was just bawling my eyes out. And finally he was like, okay, and sent a referral in. And then I got my diagnosis and I was like, I win. And I'm sorry if I'm over explaining, but it was like a really revelatory experience, because if you've gone through this, you would know that, I mean, there's this just huge processing period after being diagnosed late, where you look back at your entire life and realize, oh my God, that was autism, and that was autism, and that was autism, and
Sure. Because I have no concept of what it's like to be an adult and not knowing I'm autistic. So that's crazy. I don't understand what it would be like and feel like to endure, I suppose, 21 years of adulthood and not. Well, no, actually, no. You were 35, so yeah.
35.
You were 35, so that's crazy to me, because I was diagnosed at 14.
And I think a lot of my PTSD is from that. I think you can have PTSD, you know, just being diagnosed early too, because, you know, the world is full of microaggressions that are traumatic to us that aren't to, you know, typical people. But unfortunately, I also had very broken home. I came from a very broken home, so my childhood foundation was also very unstable. So it was easy to believe the diagnosis I got when I was 21, like, oh, I'm just traumatized, this is just PTSD. But I was in therapy for 11 years off and on, and I had gotten to a point after many, well, I wouldn't say many, but a few really abusive relationships as an adult, that my life just kept going through this cycle of me trying so hard to get ahead, like almost making it, and then literally my entire life sort of just falling apart. And, you know, I didn't know it at the time, but psychology and PTSD became one of my special interests. And I just voraciously read and watched videos and learned everything I possibly could about trauma. Like, I'm going to beat this, I'm going to figure this out. And I was also super dedicated to trying to understand my mother. Like, why was she like that? Why did she do the things she did? My abuse came from my mother, mostly. And I think having that as a special interest and learning everything I could about it made me sort of realize, like, something else is going on. So that's why I had a few years prior to that become suicidal, because I couldn't figure it out. I consider myself fairly smart, and I felt like, you know, I had done absolutely everything I could. I've read everything I could. I've gone to therapy. I've done all these things. Why is this not working? I even delved. Delved. It's a really weird word. Into the spiritual community, like, okay, it's not my mind, it's not my body, it must be my spirit, like, let me focus on that. And that became a special interest, and like that wasn't working either, because the new age spiritual community is full of ableist, really damaging perspectives when it comes to trauma, chronic illness, and neurodivergence, and there's no space for that difference there, and it was almost more traumatizing.
Yeah, because that would have been very invalidating, presumably.
Yeah. Especially when they were presenting things to me like mirror theory, where your abuser is showing you something within you, and that's why you're having that reaction to that person. And it's like, can we please just have some accountability for the fact that people do damaging things and they are abusive and they should be held responsible? It's not up to me to.
Because I can remember immersing myself in those kinds of circles, and they'd say things like, you know, you're creating everything that's happening to you.
Yeah, manifestation mindset.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing. So I have some other questions here. I was wondering, what's the difference between meltdowns and panic attacks in your view?
So I've done a lot of research the last week on sort of like the different perspectives of what that is. So for me, I think I definitely had PTSD when I was diagnosed with it. And I remember what it was like to have panic attacks back then. I've had meltdowns my whole life, obviously, because I've been autistic my whole life. But meltdowns for me, panic attacks for me felt like I would be, you know, in the kitchen making breakfast, no big deal. And then suddenly a song would come on the radio, and it was the same song that was playing maybe when I had a traumatic experience. But when you're a child going through a traumatic experience and something like that happens, it's very common for those memories to be blocked out. So there's a lot of my childhood I don't remember. So as an adult, if I heard that song, I wouldn't necessarily know it was connected to what happened to me, say when I was like 8 or something. And so a panic attack is immediate. Like the song plays, boom, anxiety attack, heart's racing, I can't breathe, I need to sit down, like full, like, oh my God, like so fast the panic attack comes on from like a trigger like that. And the trigger is usually related to a traumatic event. So I'm just going to read if that's okay, because it helps me. So panic is an emotional response to an overload of anxiety as well. It can be caused by triggers, overanalyzing, and flashbacks to previous traumatic events. So another time I'll have a panic attack is when I'm like thinking too much about something, and I just can't get that out of my head. Like, I don't know, if it's something I don't want to do and I have to, like going to an unpleasant doctor experience or the dentist, and I can't let go of the thought, and it can turn into panic that way for me too. Versus a meltdown, where a meltdown is a complete overload of functioning. So for me, when I have a meltdown, it comes on a little bit slower. It's not necessarily immediate. And I also have alexithymia. So sometimes it's very difficult for me to tell that I am heading towards a meltdown, but since I've started to really understand what they are for me, it's been a lot easier for me to keep track of when a meltdown's coming. So usually a meltdown is coming when, you know, I haven't had enough food, I haven't had enough sleep, I have too much on my plate, I'm doing too much. There are external stressors on me. I have to meet demands that I don't feel able to meet. And, you know, maybe that could build over a week or a month. Usually for me, it's a few days, but for some people, it can get a little longer. And if I'm already in a depleted state, meltdowns, they start coming on like this hazy shadow. That's sort of like, here I come. And then, you know, it gets closer, and then I'll start to lose my words.
So there's more forewarning and build up.
Yeah.
The panic attack is instant and catches you off guard.
Yes.
Trigger precipitates the panic attack very rapidly.
Right.
Whereas a meltdown is more to do with overwhelm. So
it builds slowly, and it involves the sensory centers of the brain versus the amygdala, the fear center of the brain. So a panic attack would involve the fear center, and a meltdown would involve the sensory and potentially the amygdala as well, because sometimes we can have panic. We're afraid we're gonna have a meltdown, like, oh God, I'm gonna have a meltdown. Oh my God. And then you start having a panic attack, and then you start having a meltdown on top of the panic attack, and then they go like this. And it's really difficult to untangle.
It's a melt attack.
Yeah. And those are very, very hard. And I work with a psychologist and actually take medication, because when I have a meltdown panic attack, I could be in danger. I've had them in public before where, you know, I've had to sit down and rock on a bike path, and I'm in public. Anybody could come and do anything. They could take my purse, you know, so that's why I decided that, you know, I'm going to take this medication to help me, because I can't calm down from a meltdown like that on my own. I can calm down from a panic attack on my own if it's just a panic attack. Okay. And that's another difference. What else did I write here? Oh, meltdowns take longer to recover from as well. So panic attacks can cause a person to have a long time to recover, but it affects the emotional centers of the brain and the fear centers, like I said. So you can have feelings of guilt, depression, and then trauma memories can come back. And that's more like an emotional coping, processing through that experience. And whereas a meltdown, thoughts and coping tools and things like that may not necessarily help a meltdown at all.
No,
so a meltdown,
it's overwhelm, overload. So
yeah. So a meltdown
attack isn't. Sorry, I'm just trying to make it clear in my mind. Because it's a very important distinction to make, and I think a lot of parents here especially, this will be useful for. So to recap, meltdown is about overload and overwhelm and is based in the sensory centers of the brain, whereas panic attack, rapid onset, as opposed to a gradual build-up. And it's more emotional in nature, based in the fear centers of the brain.
Yeah. So a panic attack is based off the amygdala fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response. Okay. And a meltdown is based off of the sensory centers and the overwhelm of thinking, executive function. And it's important to note that if you are witnessing or caring for a person who has trauma and autism, that it can look instantaneous. A meltdown can look instant because they might not recognize the signs in that individual before it presents. So I often find with my partner that he'll think I'm fine because I've learned over a lifetime to mask and hide what I'm feeling. And I have alexithymia, and I may not know what I'm feeling. I am feeling, but I don't know it. I don't know necessarily, like, oh, my heart's racing. I don't know what that is.
I have another couple of questions to ask, actually. Is one easier to mask, in your opinion? And if you can't always distinguish panic from meltdown on a kind of experiential alexithymic level, how do you tell them apart? So the first question is one easier to mask than the other? And I'll ask the second one again at the end if we forget.
Yeah, I can mask a panic attack.
Okay.
But I'm now 39. So I've had an entire lifetime of figuring out how to do that. And I don't think it's necessarily a healthy coping tool, but it is very important coping tool to have if you're in public or around people that are not safe for you to have that kind of experience.
Yeah.
So usually what happens for me historically is I'll feel a panic attack coming on, or maybe I may be misinterpreting it and it was actually a meltdown, but I'll feel my heart racing, like, oh God, triggered. Okay, good examples. I used to work at a coffee shop, and say a customer came in and they triggered me because of something they said customers can be really nasty. And then it's like, oh God. So I need to run away. So usually what would happen is I would be very calm, but I would say to my coworker, like, hey, I'm going to go to the bathroom. I'll be right back. And then I would wouldn't run, but I would very quickly go to the bathroom. And that's where I would have my full blown hyperventilating. I would lock the door. I would hide. So I think what may be happening for me is that I'm having a panic attack, and then it turns into a meltdown.
Right. Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yes. Complete sense. And the second question was, how do you personally tell them apart if you can't necessarily feel it?
Okay, so with alexithymia, it's very important to understand your bodily reactions. Another way to tell if a person is alexithymic is if you ask them how they are, they will often respond with what they're doing or what they're feeling in their body. So if you say to me, how are you? I'll be like, oh, I'm watching a show. Or how are you? Oh, I'm my foot hurts really bad. So that's when it clicked for me, like, oh, I think I have that for sure. And also important to note that trauma survivors can have alexithymia without being autistic. So it is something that's common in all the neurotypes.
Yeah. Is that due to disassociation, would you say?
No, that's separate and different. So alexithymia is the inability to verbalize what it is that you're feeling. I can't put my feelings into words. And it takes me, I would say, a day or even up to a few days, depending on the event, to figure out why I had that reaction that I did. So I have to look at the experience that happened leading up to the emotional outburst. And it could be anger, it could be fear, but I won't necessarily know. On my birthday, for example, I'll get a gift and my heart's racing. And it takes me a very long time to suss out, is my heart racing because I'm afraid? Am I going to have a panic attack? Or is this excitement? And I can't tell. So I have to be like, wait, okay, it's my birthday. I'm getting a gift. This is excitement. I can calm down now. Yeah. Where I feel kind of like a bird. If you've ever seen a bird's feathers like poof up and they get very like, that's kind of what I feel like leading up to a feeling that I can't describe. It's kind of like something's coming and I don't know what it is. Okay, it's just anxiety, and then my feathers go back down. Or okay, it's just excitement, my feathers go back down, because then I understand what's happening. And that's another thing with alexithymia, is I think that you can have fear about not knowing what you're feeling, and it can be so complicated to understand and figure out.
Awesome. Okay, awesome. Thank you. Can you talk about the overlap of autistic experience and trauma presentation?
Yes. Okay, so in the psychological field, they have not done a lot of study when it comes to autism and trauma, and ADHD and trauma. They haven't actually done the work. So in a lot of ways, if you're an autistic person and you go to therapy, they will treat you like a neurotypical person, because that's the studies that they've done. Where we need a different approach. We need different methodologies, and like CBT, for example, cognitive behavioral therapy, hasn't really seemed to be very effective for autistic people, where something like DBT, I always mess with the word and want to say diabolical, but I think it's I wrote it down.
Dialectical.
Thank you. So that therapy has seemed to be better for autistic people, as well as EMDR. But you asked me what the presentation looks like. The presentation of autism, PTSD, and BPD can all look very similar. They can have overlaps in the diagnostic criteria, whereas so PTSD and Cptsd are two different things, and BPD and autism often get misdiagnosed for each other as well. They kind of all just...
I was just going to say, there are people here who may not be familiar with what these initials stand for. So BPD is borderline personality disorder, PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder, and CPTSD is complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And
yeah.
Okay, back to you, Angel.
And complex post-traumatic stress disorder can have similar symptoms to borderline personality disorder, CPTSD and PTSD, and borderline personality disorder are both mental health conditions, and autism is a neural mapping. So that's really important to distinguish them. I feel like psychologists don't often do that, where they sort of just try to treat the trauma but ignore the autism. And that's not helpful in my experience, because when I've gone to therapy, I know a lot about what I experienced because of, my own research. But they always want to focus on the trauma without actually helping me to understand that, okay, in this instance, this isn't a meltdown. This is a panic attack, or in this instance, this is a panic attack, not a meltdown. And autistic people like to know. We need to know the why. The why gives us comfort, stability, and foundation to work off of. If we don't have the why, we're getting nowhere. So if you don't tell me why something is happening, and you just say it's panic or it's fear, and it isn't helping me because I don't have the why, I don't have the foundation, I don't understand, I don't know, I don't grow. If I don't know, I don't grow. That's a really good slogan.
It is. Someone needs to meme that up. And just letting you know, because I know you can't see the comment section, but there are a lot of love and caring emojis being shared for you. A lot of people are relating as well. Just wanted to let you know.
I am glad for that.
Sure.
So it was suggested to the DSM-5, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, was suggested to the DSM-5, which is how we diagnose mental health conditions. Autism is in the DSM. So is PTSD. But CPTSD is not recognized by the DSM-5 because America decided it didn't want to include it. And even though the Veterans Affairs in the US think it should be included because war PTSD and complex PTSD are different. However, people that have gone to war and have been in prison camps can have complex stress disorder. So complex stress disorder, if you want me to go into that, I can. But I could be going off on tangents too, so.
I think it's quite useful for people to know.
Okay, Cptsd symptoms include prolonged and repeated traumas, and they need special consideration because of the length of time that the trauma was experienced. The diagnostic criteria for CPTSD is 1, emotional regulation is dysregulated, so emotional dysregulation. 2, you forget the traumatic events completely. 3, your self-perception is affected by the events. So, for example, being in a narcissistic relationship where the abuser convinced you of something that isn't actually true for yourself, you may adopt that self-perception even though it's inaccurate for who you actually are. 4, distorted perceptions of their perpetrators or preoccupation with revenge. 5, relations to others, including your isolation and or trust. So your ability to connect with others is affected by CPTSD. 6, your own sense of meaning or sense of hopelessness. It's similar to PTSD, but in treatment, there's an intense focus on interpersonal difficulties. So CPTSD affects your interpersonal relationships a little bit more than maybe PTSD does. Just because complex post-traumatic stress is often caused by interpersonal relationships. And those with repeated trauma will have trouble trusting, not lashing out, feeling safe, and managing their feelings of shame and guilt. So that is very similar to borderline personality disorder, which is fear of abandonment, unstable relationships, unstable sense of self. Now, one difference is impulsiveness is added here, which was not in the CPTSD. Recurrent suicidal behavior and self-injurious behavior, which does seem like autism, which is why the two are very often misdiagnosed. Extreme mood swings, chronic feelings of emptiness, inappropriate anger, feeling of suspicion, or being out of touch with reality. So that's the one key difference between autism and borderline personality disorder, is the suspiciousness, the paranoia. However, 24% of those with PTSD also have borderline personality disorder, and 30% of people with borderline personality disorder also have PTSD.
There's also a school of thought which believe personality disorders are forms of complex PTSD, in the sense that these individuals would be exposed to, well, they'd be subjected to prolonged exposure to abuse in various forms very early on.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, during the formative years, you know, before they even have like a cohesive sense of self, they receive one blow after another from their turbulent environments.
Yeah, and I actually think that my mom had all of these, all of the above.
Right. Okay.
I think she was a severely traumatized person with borderline personality disorder and PTSD. And it's important to note that autism is a neural mapping of the brain, and borderline personality disorder and PTSD are mental health concerns, and any neurotype can have them.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very important point. At no point are individuals required to be autistic prior to receiving a diagnosis of PTSD, Cptsd, or cluster B personality disorders.
Oh, it's also important to note that in America, you cannot receive a CPTSD diagnosis, but in other countries you can, because it is considered a diagnosis by the ICD-11.
Yeah. So we use that in Europe.
Okay, which is the World Health Organization version of the DSM. So it's just America. That's for whatever reason.
Bloody America. Right. So, can you describe your experience with alexithymia and emotional dysregulation?
It's a hard one. I'm still figuring it out myself. The first thing that comes to mind when I want to talk about alexithymia is that I feel like this is why people have accused autistic people of not feeling, of not having empathy. Because if you hear that a person doesn't have feelings or can't perceive their feelings, then you immediately think that person doesn't have feelings, that person feels nothing, you know? But that's not what it is. We have feelings, we feel them. We just don't necessarily have the words for them. We don't necessarily know how to verbalize what it is that we're feeling. And we can, once we have time to process and understand what happened, why, how I got there. Okay, that was anger. I understand that now. Where before I had my autism diagnosis, I thought I never felt anger. And I'm realizing, like, now that I'm trying to categorize what my emotions are and what they look like in my body, that I've been angry a lot. It just feels like anxiety in my body. So I've been misinterpreting it. But like injustice makes me angry, and it makes my heart race, and it makes me have shallow breathing. All of the same bodily sensations that I'm having when I have anxiety, I also have when I'm angry. Except I did notice a difference in that anger, my face gets hot. And my ears get hot. And then I could be like, oh, I'm angry. Okay, I need to do the coping tools for anger because I'm actually feeling anger. Sometimes
so the physical symptoms are more reliable predictors.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So if you have alexithymia, or you know someone who you think might, it's very important to help them learn how to track their bodily reactions to events and to recognize what event happened before the bodily reaction. You can put it in a chart, you know, event, bodily reaction, what happened after, how did I calm down? And if you can chart that out, you can start to see a pattern, and you can start to recognize and learn how to understand what you're feeling. Another example of alexithymia that I notice is that when something happens, I don't react right away. It takes me a long time to be able to react to something. And that can be a trauma response too, because if you've been raised in an environment where it wasn't safe to emote, you might be less likely to show your emotions, because in a traumatic household growing up, you have to hide to survive. You have to be invisible to survive, because if you're seen, you're more likely to be, you know, potentially attacked or called out or anything like that. So I want to say that the two can be similar, which is, I think, why people with trauma and autism can have alexithymia. It isn't exclusive to autism. That's important to note as well.
Cool. I want to be clear on how you're defining alexithymia. So it isn't to do with an inability to feel emotion. It has more to do with an inability to articulate or verbalize what the emotion is. Or is there a sense of because as to my personal experience, my emotions seem vividly clear to me. I don't appear to have any issue with introspection, alexithymia, or I've said them all. So is it that you feel you feel anger, but because I'm trying to get inside your head, you're going to be better at explaining it, but I'm trying to make sure that I know what you're talking about. So you feel anger, and you don't necessarily say to yourself, this is anger, but you think, oh, there's that feeling again. I felt it before. I kind of know it by experience, but I don't know it by name. Is it that kind of thing?
Yes, it's the difficulty verbalizing and identifying what it is that you're feeling. So, and for me personally, with the trauma background, I think it's also tied to, this is me personally, it's not the definition of alexithymia, but a hesitation to react. I feel that greatly. Like, weird examples I have in my history, and I know that people with trauma are more likely to be calm when a traumatic event happens because we're used to it. Like, we're used to things being crazy and insane and like difficult to deal with, and okay, something just exploded. You know, we're used to that. So there was a car wreck that happened in front of me, and when I lived in New York City, and I thought it was so strange that the entire, you know, there's a lot of people in New York City, so a lot of people around this car wreck, and they're all just looking at this woman, and she's trying to push out of the car. And I look around and I'm like, why is no one doing anything? And I realized later that maybe it's liability, I don't know, but everyone was like a deer in headlights, like, you know, not able to function, where I was the only person in the crowd that went up to the woman and said, hey, you need to get out on the other side, like help is coming, because I had been notified that they had already called an ambulance. And then there was one other man that was also helping, and I was like, you know, just breathe, like help is coming. And I was able to help, even though that always confused me, because why was I the only person that didn't react? And I didn't react later either. It wasn't like a delayed.
So it was an instant reaction. There was no, in that sense, there was no delay, or there was no inhibition.
There was no inhibition to act, but there was an inhibition to feel, I think. See, but that's the thing. I was feeling, I just wasn't identifying.
That's really interesting, because I can actually relate to that. That's happened a couple of times to me. I can remember we were out with the family a few years ago, and an old man with a walking stick fell over, and everyone around me gasped and froze, and I instantly ran over to him. And so that's just reminding me of that situation, because for me, it was just that event precipitated an immediate reaction to run over and help, and everyone else gasped first. I didn't gasp.
Yeah,
I reacted.
That's the same. And it's happened to me multiple times in my life. There was a boy that had gotten caught in a riptide, and no one knew what to do or how to help. And the entire time I was calm. I said, we can't go in the water. We'll get carried away too, because I grew up in San Diego. So riptides are very common, and you grow up learning about them. But this happened in New England, and I don't know if people are taught about riptides here. But the whole time I was calm. I was able to, use my phone to communicate with it was a deaf college that was vacationing on the vineyard where I lived. And everyone else was just kind of standing around where like I was acting and there was no hesitation in my action. So perhaps that's not an alexithymic.
But I was going to say, could it be also a matter of hyper empathy? Because I am often in a situation where I need it to stop. I need the person, you know, healed quickly, because it's like I feel like I can feel it and I can't deal with it. So is there a sense of hyper empathy?
A really loud truck just went by.
It's right.
Hyper empathy, I can't say because I don't know what I was feeling.
Right. Okay. Right.
I know that I do feel like I have hyper empathy. If someone's crying, I want to cry. If a friend, especially someone close to me, is experiencing an emotion, I feel that emotion with them, which is interesting because I have difficulty identifying my emotions. But I get overcome with waves of feeling, but instead of feeling it in what I imagine people feel in their head, like, oh, I'm feeling anger, I feel it in my body.
So there's no, so it's like it kind of bypasses a filter of consciousness in a way, whereby it kind of goes up first. This is anger. Okay, now I can proceed. But with us, it's just, it doesn't, it bypasses the conscious filter.
Yeah, that feels accurate.
Okay. Oh, nice. That's really interesting. Because someone I know, a good friend of mine, reported not so long ago that in a kind of hostile situation, they don't get scared, even if there's a threat of violence. So that could be. Yeah,
and that makes bullies mad.
Yeah.
And then it makes me laugh because they're mad.
Yeah.
Which is not necessarily a good reaction to have.
I think it is. If it makes them mad, they deserve it.
Yeah, but then maybe you're not safe.
Yeah, maybe, but that's the thing, isn't it? Because maybe we need those fight or flight responses to keep us safe, but
yeah,
it makes the bullies mad. So I want to focus. I want to dwell on that one.
It makes me laugh though. What is that reaction?
It doesn't make sense. We're a very illogical lot. So what has helped you to heal? Any coping tools that you can share or recommend?
Okay, well, it's a big breath for this topic. I would say if you're in a place where you need support, reach out and find that support. The problem with being neurodivergent is that interpersonal trauma is very common for us. So asking for help is a scary, traumatic event, potentially, right? So I did advocacy for post-traumatic stress disorder before I found out I was autistic, and then I dedicated my time to autism after that. But I noticed a difference between traumatized autistic people and potentially undiagnosed or not autistic post-traumatic stress people. Does that make sense? The crowd I interacted with in that advocacy versus this one, they had an easier time asking for help, where autistic people have a very difficult time asking for help. And the reason that I think I was able to ask for help is because I grew up around a severely traumatized mother who didn't know how to ask for help. And I'm a very logical, literal person. So I'm very observational as well. And that could be in connection to having alexithymia. You know, I would watch her and I would watch how she herself would have her life continuously repeating this cycle of fall apart, get back together, fall apart, get back together. She never asked for help. And I would say that the number one thing that helped me is that I asked for help. I did not always receive the right care. I want to preface that, but I did find the courage to ask for help. And that's really important because this is not conversations, that people have very much in our community because they're very big and heavy and scary topics. But we have a very high rate of suicide in our community. So I think it's very important, me personally, in my own experience, that I had to ask for help when I needed it. And I was terrified of doing that. I was terrified that it was going to be on my record forever, and that every doctor I ever went to after that was going to see me through that lens. And I felt like a broken person. And after living with a mom who never got help, I was determined, life purpose level, to find that help for myself, because
self-advocate.
Yeah, because I saw that that was the one area that she wasn't able to. And trauma, I think, as an autistic person, can cause us to isolate, to be afraid to make connections, even more so than a neurotypical person with CPTSD, because we're scared. Because my default setting is, I've offended this person, now I must leave, rejection sensitive dysphoria. And that isolation is not a place that can always heal trauma, especially very severe trauma. And I'm speaking from my own perspective of having very severe trauma and neglect as a child. And when I turned 18, I was having repeated panic attacks and meltdowns. I didn't know they were meltdowns at the time, but I went and got help. I was diagnosed with PTSD at 21. And when I got that diagnosis, I was absolutely terrified of it, because I thought it meant that my worst fear had come true, and I was just as ableist terminology, I'm sorry, damaged as my mom, because my mom was who gave me PTSD. And at the time, that was the mindset I had. And I'm sharing that for anybody that might be in that place now. I'm also sharing from the perspective of, I asked for help, I got help, I fought for myself when they didn't give me the right help, and I never gave up. And I'm in a place now where I have a mostly stable, healthy self-concept. I've been in and out of therapy for 11 years. I've had therapists that didn't work for me. And, there was a lot lacking in therapy because of my neurology. But I did learn a lot. And what I learned in therapy that did help me was coping tools. And I didn't know I was autistic at the time, but one that really helped me was visual stimming. And anything that you can do if you're having a panic attack because of previous trauma, anything that you can do to get yourself present in the current moment, if the current moment is safe. If the current moment isn't safe, relocate to a safe place and then try to get yourself present. And I have a tattoo on my hand. It says safe. It's probably backwards. I don't know if it is.
No, it's the right way around.
So the reason that I tattooed this on my hand is because I used to write it on my hand because I had such bad trauma and flashbacks. And I needed to remind myself that I'm safe. There's a really great book also that helped me called The Body Keeps the Score, basically about how your body retains traumatic experiences, especially if they're physical. So what I did personally is I would go to therapy, and right after therapy, I scheduled, right after, I'd leave that office and go to the next. I scheduled a craniosacral, which is where you lay on a table and the person gently holds the back of your skull, gently holds the back of your spine. And I didn't know about autism then, but I needed sensory integration therapy, right? And that's what that was for me, is that the person would help me breathe while I was being gently touched. And I know that could sound scary for some people. I'm actually hyposensitive to touch. So if you're hypersensitive to touch, this might not work for you, but it did for me because I had so much physical abuse in my past. I needed not only sensory integration therapy, but I needed to know that someone could touch me and that was safe. So I needed to be safe in my body. So mentally, yes, I needed to do therapy and coping tools and learn how to break out of a panic attack, how to break intrusive thoughts, how to be present when I feel locked in the past. And it's not like you're hallucinating the past happening. It's that you're having the emotions in the present that you should have had in the past. It's like they got filed away. And then when you're in a safe place, they all come out because finally you're in a place where you're able to deal with them. And one thing I had when that experience happened to me is that I felt like, oh no, everything's falling apart. I'm having these reactions again, when in actuality, it was a step up in the healing because it meant I was safe enough to hold space for that part of me that was terrified, afraid, lonely, and lost. And that's why my poetry blog is called Lost Ghost, because for most of my life, I felt lost and invisible. Like no one could see me. No one understood what I went through. People had these families where they had dinner and they ate together, and I want to cry just thinking about it. Like, I just remember watching them and being like so confused and not really realizing that when I was a kid, I was actually living through a trauma. Because how do you know? You only know what you see and what you have. You don't know.
It was all
that
in.
your life.
That's the thing as well, because harking back to the what we were talking about with Alexithymia, it can be really difficult to understand that you're anxious and maybe even being subjected to trauma when the anxiety and trauma are all encompassing and persistent and relentless, and that's all you've ever known.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of us do that in the community. If people ask us maybe how anxious do we feel on any given day, we might answer with, oh, I feel kind of good today. But our kind of good today is someone else's really anxious who isn't used to feeling anxious all of the time. I had to notice that myself. I'm still a very anxious person a lot of the time, and I will stress about seemingly trivial issues. They're not trivial to me, but they seem to be to other people. And then I really have to think, oh, wait, no, that is my normal. That's my normal, you know. So it's very important for us to recognize that, oh, you know, maybe there's stuff there that can heal, but we're not even recognizing it because we're so accustomed to it. It's like, what would life be? What would life be without all of these little mischievous entities that like to wreak havoc within?
Yeah, that's a really valid and interesting point, because we don't like change. Autistic people don't like change. So if we're used to being in an anxious state, if we're used to those hormones releasing in our brains, this happened to me, we'll make it happen. We'll make the anxiety happen because that feels more normal. Mm-hmm. And I'll share a story of how I did that. My mom got custody in the divorce, and my dad's an amazing, loving, wonderful human being, and I have nothing but good things to say about him. Mm-hmm. So my mom left when I was 17. I went to my dad's for summer vacation, and my mom was supposed to come pick me up so I could go back to high school, and she never came back, and I only saw her maybe once or twice after that in my adult life. And my dad's house was amazing, right? Like, I had my own room. I had my own TV. I didn't have these things at my mom's house. I had my own bed. I could put my own posters on the wall. I wasn't living with an exceedingly controlling person. My dad is just so easygoing and just awesome. And I didn't know how to handle that at all, because my whole life I had lived in emotional and physical abuse from my mom. And now I'm in a loving, supportive environment where I have food. I didn't have food. Like, I have food in the fridge, and my dad has family dinner time. And unfortunately, my dad only got me every other weekend and for summer vacations. So I didn't see him as much as I wanted to. But I do believe that it was his influence, as well as my grandparents, that helped me have a solid foundation to work off of, and to see night and day. You know, like, this is what it's like at my dad's house. This is what it's like with my mom. There's a difference. So when I was 18, obviously I was completely devastated that my mom left, because I love my mom so much. What kid, you know, doesn't? And I was so hurt that she left. And here I am living in this really safe, loving, supportive environment, and I have no idea how to respond to that at all. So I just became a hellion, like, didn't listen to my dad, stayed out all night, shaved my head, started a punk band, started screaming into microphones and bringing really weird looking people over and sneaking out my window. And I was just a complete and total nightmare. And my poor dad, and looking back on it, I realized, like, I did that because instability was familiarity for me.
Right.
And I didn't know how to live the other way. And it took a lot of work to figure out that I could be in a safe, supported environment. But the first thing I had to do was figure out how to be a safe and supportive environment inside my own self, inside my own head, inside my own body. And I had to do that first. And it took a lot of work, but it did happen. And I went from being a person who, you know, self-sabotaged and attacked myself relentlessly inside of my own head to becoming a poet that writes about self-love. And like, I read my poems sometimes and I'm like, oh my goodness, these are really sappy. But I guess I'm just saying that because if you're in that place where you're feeling like downtrodden and just like life is against you and everything you try fails, just keep going. Like, keep learning as much as you can about neuroplasticity. Is something I didn't mention and I wanted to. Neuroplasticity is the process of building new neural pathways in your mind. And if you grow up, this is the tree of your mind, okay? These are all the branches of all the things that you've learned about who you are. And the more that you use a thought, let's say this one's a thought, the more that I think this, I am broken, the more that myelin sheath on that neural pathway gets firm. Now, that's a big science way to say this is a highway that thought travels down, and the more you travel down it, the harder the road gets, the harder it is for you to uproot that road and build a new one. So when you're building new thoughts in your mind, you have to remember that you're basically bulldozing a forest, laying down a new pathway, and then you keep going that way until you've built a new path. Building new neural pathways takes time and effort, and it's really, really hard. And it takes 6 months to break a habit, right? So imagine how long it takes to build a new tree in your mind of, I am worthy, I deserve to be here, my differences are acceptable, who I am is amazing. And if these people don't get it, they're showing me who they are. I know myself, and I know I am worthy of so much more than what was given to me in my past. I know that I'm misunderstood, so I need to find people that get me, and I need to fight for myself.
Now that's really interesting because presumably a lot of this took place before you recognize you were autistic, because that's quite powerful, because people often attribute that kind of reinvention, positive reinvention of their inner world to understanding their neurodivergent identity, right? So I just think it's really powerful that you did that prior. You did that prior, you know, because that's why many of us get quite irritated when people say, "Oh, these are just labeled." It's like, no. The beauty of the identity of being autistic is that you can replace the toxic inner diatribe with, "Hey, I'm an autistic person, and now all of my hideous experiences make sense because I was expected to live in a world that wasn't designed for me." So yeah, this is what you went through is a kind of different way of arriving at or transforming your relationship with yourself.
Yeah, I would say that I started building the roads to the new me, but the tree didn't bear fruit until I knew I was autistic.
Okay, right. Okay. So you prepared for it.
Yes.
You paved the way for the autistic identity.
Yeah.
But that's why it's interesting. So the reason why I find it interesting is because usually it's the other way around. But you did it in reverse order. That's fascinating.
I think when I was diagnosed with autism, he told me that the reason that I got missed, and of course it was the 80s and 90s that I was a kid, so that could have been it alone. But he said the reason I was missed is because this was his words, I feel weird saying it, but that I was smart enough to figure it out. So I think what that meant to me is that I am very super duper observational, and that could be a trauma learned trait because you have to watch everyone to make sure they're but I observed people to catalog and analyze their behavior and see how they function together, and I would go to coffee shops and sit at coffee shops and just watch people. Okay, that person's laughing at that joke, that person's doing that, that's how that person gets in the car. And, you know, like just cataloging information, like give me the information to like understand people. And I think I did that same analyzing of my, like I had this ability to see myself, make any sense, like outside of myself. And
I'm
like
I'm relating hard to what you're saying.
Cataloging and analyzing information relating to my own experience. And I do think, now this is new for me, as you know, I just discovered that I'm PDA as well. So
yeah,
I think being a kid with PDA, like you could not tell me who I am. You can't. If you try, I'm gonna freak out and we're gonna have words. And this is me at 8, okay? Like I was in the Catholic school at 8, and then the nun told me that animals don't go to heaven. And I stood up in class. You're supposed to raise your hand, like you have to follow the rules of Catholic school, right? I mean, nuns are scary. I stood up with my arms on my, you know, my hands on my hips, and I said, Jesus is not the Son of God. And I'm sorry, Christians that are watching, I said it to cause a problem. You know,
you were trolling.
Yes,
you were trolling the Catholic Church hard. I get it.
I said it because she had offended me so profusely to tell me that my beloved fuzzy creatures at home don't get to go to heaven. Like I wanted her to feel the same way I did. So I said that. And even from 8 years old, I knew who I was and nobody could tell me who I was.
That is it. You know, people, PDA, well, kids, because obviously almost all of the literature is written about kids. The kids are described as having a lack of identity. And I'm like, no, that's bullshit. We know exactly who we are. It's just that we're not allowed to be who we are. So then they describe it as a lack of identity. They're like, oh, they're not conforming to what kids that age should be doing. It's like, damn right we're not, because that's not who we are.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Someone asked, do you forgive your mother?
Yes. And I sigh because this is also they're big topics, right? So my mom passed away in 2014. Up until that point, I had a very difficult time with the whole concept of forgive your abuser. I was angry at my mom, rightly so. But the more that I learned about psychology, the more that I had the why, the easier it was for me to understand. And that understanding paved the way to be able to release the anger that I had. And I would phrase it that way because there's so much in our cultures that say, forgive, forgive, forgive. Trauma survivors are not going to be able to forgive like that. It's not how it works. Like someone doesn't come and, you know, just destroy your whole world and they're like, it's okay. Like that's not healthy. And telling a trauma survivor to do that is not healthy. And like, I get it that you're trying to make the emotions and reactions go away because they're uncomfortable for you, but that person is in crisis and they need you to hold space for them, not to tell them to forgive the person so that their experience of uncomfortable emotions can go away. That makes me angry. So I just want to say to other trauma survivors that might be listening, it's okay if you can't forgive whoever it is yet. Give yourself the time to grieve what you lost, to be angry, to process all that you're feeling, and then think about that, you know? Like, you have to go through the process of feeling all that you're feeling in order to heal. You have to hold space for yourself in order to get to a place of healing. And once you're at a place of healing, then there's space for forgiveness. And when my mom passed away, it was instantaneous for me. I had already done a lot of work. I knew about boundaries. I knew about healthy relationships. I'd done a lot. I chose as an adult to go no contact with my mom because she was just a very damaging person. But I know that her own experience was the result of a lifetime of severe and repeated traumas that she fought tooth and nail to keep me from. And she did. She protected me to the point where I, wasn't allowed to go outside, but she protected me. And the things that happened to her didn't happen to me. And she taught me how to live in the world. And I do think she was an undiagnosed autistic person.
Yeah.
And
Did she
Yeah,
did she do the best she could despite her many shortcomings?
absolutely, 100%. And I know that. And I even knew that as a kid. I ran away once and I went back the same night because I was so scared for her. And, you know, some childhood victims of abuse, you know, we do become the sort of like protectors or parents of our parents. And I definitely felt like a parent of my mom, but I knew her as well. So, you know how like as an autistic person, I often feel that people don't know me. They don't know who I really am, and I can't show them who I really am because they'll react poorly and they won't actually see me, and they'll react to what they think they're seeing, but they're not actually seeing me.
Relatable.
I feel like I knew my mom. I knew her. I knew her the way no one else knew her. I knew that part of her that was different and amazing and sparkly, and like she could be happier. The joy that she had was just 100%, you know, just like she could change the room with her presence in a good way. And she had so many amazing things. So when I talk about my trauma, I'm just saying it because that was my life and my experience, but it doesn't mean that I don't love, appreciate, and honor my mother, because I do. Which is also why I wanted to advocate, because I don't want anyone to ever have to live through the life that she lived. I don't ever want anyone to have to go through that again. That's a trauma or trauma survivor, an autistic person. And so, yeah, I guess the question was, do I forgive her? And it's like, when she died, it was instantaneous for me. But I had built the foundation of healing and holding space and learning about trauma and healing from it before I was able to do that. And when she passed away, the only thing I wanted to do was find her, be there, do whatever I could for her, honor her in any way that I possibly could, give her what she never got, but she so rightly deserved, because we all deserve love and compassion and kindness and empathy and understanding of differences. None of us deserve to be mistreated, rejected, dismissed, repelled by other people. Like, we all need to learn how to hold space for each other and for our differences. And we live in a world right now where the worst thing you could possibly be is different, and different political beliefs, different ideologies, different cultures. You know, we need to work harder to come together and support and understand people who are different. And I think that's why I was able to fight so hard for myself, because I love my mom that much. And I wanted to fight for her, for that little girl inside her that was so deeply hurt and afraid of the world.
Wow.
Ramble, sorry.
Please don't apologize. That was the most beautiful ramble. People, someone said, Autie Angel, you are so amazing. Thank you for saying all this. People are really, really, really identifying with what you're saying, resonating, and yeah, we have all the smiles, all the love, all the care, all the praise. So, you know what? I think that could be a good place to wrap all of this up. So, oh, Angel, you are truly the most beautiful human and so formidable. A lot of love. Okay. Angel, thank you so much for joining me tonight. Thank you, everyone who tuned in this evening to hear Angel's story. I, for one, am very touched and humbled, and I don't know, I feel I'll leave tonight's conversation certainly a richer person in my heart. So thank you. That was the Naughty Autie in conversation. And next week, I'm going to be joined by none other than Kieran Rose, and we're going to be talking about masking, of course. So, Angel, could I just get you to hang around a minute? Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.